Good morning, everyone. So yes, my name is Kelli-Marie and hashtag I am a psychologist. As you can see up on your screen, there's an image of a brain there, and there's lots of words inside that brain. And they're the kinds of words that I guess I get confronted with on a daily basis. So emotions, behaviour, health, well-being, wellness, disorders, problem solving, personality. So that's the kind of stuff I get confronted with on a daily basis. So today I am going to bring you into the world of a psychologist. I'll start with discussing who I am and a bit about my background. Then I'll move into what is a psychologist and perhaps what are some psychologist attributes or characteristics, what makes a good psychologist. And then I'll move into my personal journey. So I'll take you through what school was like for me, the subjects I did, my decision to be a psychologist. Then I'll go through uni and initially starting my career. I'll then take you into career pathway. So actually looking at some of the nitty-gritty of what do you actually have to do to be a psychologist at university. Lastly, I'll take you through my average day. So average day / perhaps average week to help you get a better understanding of what I do from morning to evening. And then right at the end, we'll go through some questions and hopefully I'll be able to answer them all for you. So firstly, I am a private practitioner. So I own a business called Temenos Place, and I'm a registered psychologist in Australia, and I'm an associate member of the Australian Psychological Society. I'm also a registered art and play clinician. So there's some links there that enable you to click on what they mean, a bit more background into that. But they're the associations that I'm a part of. So just a brief background. So I studied a double degree in psychology and in education at the University of Sydney, fantastic uni. Then I completed an Honours Thesis in exploring the connection between adolescent coping and decision making. So it's actually really targeting you guys, and I went into schools and I did a lot of research interviewing young people. After that, I completed a 2-year registration process or an internship with the Department of Education. So I actually worked in schools where you guys are today. For 6 years I worked there, and I also worked in a medical centre. So I got to work with really diverse needs, lots of different people, lots of different ages, lots of different backgrounds, which was pretty amazing. I then completed some additional study, some postgraduate training in art and play therapy, which is a specialist kind of skill in terms of using art and play applications in therapy. And then in 2012, I went into my own private practice called Temenos Place, where Temenos means a safe, protected and welcoming space for therapy. So I'm lucky enough to be my own boss at the moment and to work in an amazing building with some beautiful rooms, and I'm really privileged to work with so many different people. So from 3-year-olds to 13-year-olds to 73-year-olds. So there's quite a range in what I get to see. So what is a psychologist? So some of you might be sitting there and you might know what I do. You might know what a psychologist is. You might see your own psychologist. Some of you might be sitting there and the only really understanding you have a psychologist is maybe something you've seen on TV or in a movie. Or some of you might have no idea about what I do. I actually ask my clients this when I first meet them, and I say to them, what do you think my job is? So I've given you some images, which is a snapshot of what I often get fed back to me. So the first image you can see is, oh Kelly, I lie down on a couch and you sit behind me and I tell you all my problems and you write down some notes. Not really. No one's lying down when they come into my office. That's a really kind of stereotypical American psychotherapy kind of approach to psychology. I don't really operate that way. Just underneath that, you have that image there. Oh, Kelly, you sit here and you read my mind. No, I don't really do that either because I'm not a psychic. So no reading minds, that's not how I work. There's a magic wand there. Oh, Kelly, you solve all my problems. You fix everything. It's not as simple as that, unfortunately. It'd be great if I had a magic wand, but that's not how it works. And then the last thing I often get is, a psychologist, is that like a psychiatrist? Do you prescribe medication? And the answer to that is no, I don't prescribe medication. A psychiatrist is a doctor in the medical profession, and I'm a bit different to that. So, what is psychology? So when we actually look at the definition of psychology, it actually comes from mid-16th century, so it's ages ago. And it actually means the study of the soul. So logi means the study of, and psyche means the Greek word for soul or our breath, spirit, our entire being. So technically, psychology is the study of the soul. But we'll break that down a little bit for this generation. So really, the Australian Psychological Society, which is a big governing board in Australia, looks at the idea of us being experts in human behaviour. And we study factors that influence the way people think, the way people feel, the way people learn. We really look at that connection between their emotions and behaviour and feelings, and the way that we think as well. And our job is to use evidence-based strategies to help people overcome challenges and improve performance. And that can be in such a wide range of areas as well. So not all psychologists work in a private practice like me. Some might work in schools, some might work in community settings, hospitals, in research and academic settings such as a university. Some psychologists work in the law courts and in criminal kind of behaviours, some in prisons, some in the army or defence forces, private practice like myself, consulting firms and market research companies. So the actual profession of psychology is really far-reaching. It's not just about one-on-one therapy. It can be that, which is predominantly how I work, but it's actually more than that. It's an ability to work across a number of different settings, and sometimes it's about being able to consult people, being able to write programs, being able to work in big business as well. So there's quite a few, different ways in which a psychologist can work. So in Australia, the psychology profession is governed by a number of different acts and bodies, and you can't just call yourself a psychologist. You have to meet very specific requirements to be able to do that. So there's some different acts there, the National Law Act of 2008, we have a health practitioner regulation body, and we have the Psychology Board of Australia. So they're very, very specific to my role, and I have to consistently meet their standards on a daily basis. So what makes a psychologist a psychologist? Before I look at some of their common attributes, it's important to say that not all psychologists are the same. We might have a similar training, we might have a similar background, but at the same time, we might all use our role differently. It's kind of like you might have had a maths teacher last year, and then you have a maths teacher this year. They're teaching you the same kind of content, I guess, but they're really different in their personality, or they're really different in the style of their teaching. So I have some attributes of a psychologist that some of my friends or colleagues, they're not exactly the same way. So that's important to kind of get that out there firstly. So some of the generic attributes, so if you're thinking of being a psychologist, here are some things to keep in mind. So firstly, you have to have an interest in continuing education and professional development. In this job, learning doesn't stop at uni. It's actually something that you do all the time. You have to meet requirements and continue to go to courses and seminars. There's always new research that's happening. You've really got to be on your game. So I'm constantly going to different conferences or doing different workshops or reading different journals. So there's that commitment to continued growth and continued learning. Communication skills are a big part. So that's oral communication skills, so verbal, but also written communication skills. So there's quite a bit of research that is involved in my role, a lot of report writing and lots of presentations. So communication skills are quite important. Compassion. So it's really for me that ability to be able to empathise with somebody, to be able to really understand them, to be able to put them at ease, and I kind of say to do my best to walk in their shoes. So that's really important for me in terms of compassion and understanding. Good self-care practices and emotional health. I can't do what I do unless I really look after my well-being. So that's my physical well-being, my emotional, my intellectual, my spiritual. And good self-care practices, so that's looking after me, is really imperative to the job that I do. I can't be helping other people if there is so much going on in my life that I can't focus on their needs and be present with them. So there's a lot of different ways that I do that in terms of creating a balance. To avoid burnout, because burnout's a big part of the job. If you're not looking after yourself, it's really taxing, really emotionally taxing. So good self-care is really, really important and something I can't stress enough. Ethics. So you have to be an ethical person to some degree, but you also have to abide by some very specific documents called the Australian Psychological Society Code of Ethics. The last revision was, I think, in 2007. That's quite a big document. It's like 27 pages. But there are 3 guiding principles where they speak about psychologists should respect the rights and the dignity of all people and peoples. So that's really looking at, more than anything, that sense of justice, that sense of professionalism, and respecting the individual. Propriety, so that's really looking at my competence, my level of responsibility, that idea, that protection of human rights. So that's a very, very important aspect of how we work. And integrity, so my character, and the awareness for me that I'm in a position of power and of trust, and I have to ensure that I'm always acting in accordance with those ethics. Interpersonal skills, so being able to work well with people, whether that be clients, whether that be colleagues, whether that be other health professionals, so strong interpersonal skills. The knowledge of laws and regulations, I've kind of touched on them already. There's so many different, I guess, guidelines in terms of how we work. For example, one of them would be confidentiality. So really being aware of what that means, what privacy means in my role, and the duty of care I have to my clients, and helping them understand that too. So this isn't just, I know this in my mind, it's helping my clients understand where I'm coming from in terms of the decisions that I'm making, and also in terms of the work that I do generally. Open-mindedness. Really, I have to be able to be open-minded and tolerant of different ways of thinking, different ways of being, and take a really non-judgmental stance. So being open-minded is important. It comes with patience and then with goodwill. So patience is important because things don't just happen really quickly in therapy sometimes. It takes a while to get results. Or when you're doing research, for example, it takes a long time to be able to put all that together. So patience is a big part of the job. And goodwill, helping others, the altruism, and just being a trustworthy individual. So there, I guess, some general characteristics of what a psychologist should have. There's definitely more than that, but for me, they're, a good snapshot just to give you a bit of an indication of the kind of, I guess, characteristics that you should possess if you wanted to be a psychologist. Okay, so I'm going to come with now my personal journey. So now I'm going to focus a little bit more on me and my role, my life from when I was in school. So I wasn't the kind of kid or the kind of teenager who went through life saying, I know what I want to be when I grow up. I'm going to be a psychologist. That wasn't really me. I kind of entertained a number of different ideas, but I think when I look back, there was always a common theme, and it was always I wanted to do something in the helping profession. So some of the ideas that I went through were to be a teacher. I also wanted to be a nutritionist, and then psychologist as well. Mind you, I didn't know any psychologists when I was 17, 18 years old. I actually had no idea what the profession was really about. I just wanted to help people. So interestingly, in my Year 12 year, it was about June or July, this new degree came out, and I got it in my letterbox, and it was a double degree in psychology and in education, and I thought, that kind of combines 2 of those helping professions. That sounds pretty interesting. So just did a bit of research into that, and I thought, well, that's pretty good because that's going to give me a lot of options. I've got the teaching side, got the psychology side, I can be a school counsellor. So I was pretty stoked when I saw that degree, and that answered all my questions, and I'm like, yep, that's what I'm going to do. So I worked pretty hard and I was happy to get into that degree. Prerequisites, so for school, for psychology, there's no actual subject at school called psychology. So there's no actual specific prerequisite to get into psychology, although English is quite important. Year 12 English is important. I'll go into a little bit how you study psychology and perhaps some of the prerequisites that are involved depending on your major. So I'll get into that a bit later. So I went straight into uni. So I had the standard kind of few months off after my ATC, which were fantastic. And then went into this huge world of Sydney University, which for me was so different to the school that I went to, which was quite a smaller school. As I said before, for me, psychology was about, I really want to help people. You know, I really liked at school when I used to tutor kids or help people with certain subjects, and I could see how well they were doing and how much more confidence that they had. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to help people. So I get to uni, and I'm going to pull up on the screen the subjects that I was doing. So year 1 was Psychology 101, semester 1, and then Psychology 1002. Now, those subjects were kind of like, how much of the psychology world can we jam into 1001 and 1002? So it was pretty full on. I was learning about things that I thought, I didn't know this was related to psychology. I just want to help people. So I was a bit naive going into it. But what I came to understand was that the psychology profession it's very broad, and there's a lot of different theoretical frameworks that you have to be aware of and that you have to have a good grasp of before you can actually come to treating people. So I have to say I didn't really love some of those subjects, and when you look at on the screen, Year 2 got a little bit better. There was learning, there was neuroscience, perception, there was statistics. I'm like, why am I doing statistics? I didn't mind maths at school, but I'm like, why am I doing statistics? So I came to realise that research was involved in psychology too, and I had to contribute in terms of a knowledge base. So they were teaching us all about stats. So some of the stuff that you might do in Year 12 maths, but then it got more and more. Then there was developmental, social psychology, personality and individual differences. So by semester 2, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, this is a bit better. This is kind of what I'm interested in, but I had to do all those other subjects before I got to that. Year 3 was a big year. As you can see, the subject selection was quite vast there. There was the whole history and philosophy, cognitive, developmental, learning, social. So it goes through quite a bit. The stats and psychometrics I did not love at all in Year 3. But what I did love was that last subject, communication and counselling. And I got to this subject and I'm like, this is why I'm here. And it's taken me 3 years to get to this subject. So I guess my message in that is, even though I had this idea in my mind of what I wanted to do, there was a lot that I had to do to get to that point. And that was only Year 3, so there's still some time after that that you have to continue to study. So finishing those subjects, I wasn't a psychologist yet. I actually had to do an honours year. So I'm going to get into what that means. How do you actually become a psychologist? So, as I said, no prerequisites at school. Year 12 English is advised. However, you can study psychology in a few different ways. So you can do a Bachelor of Psychology, you can do a Bachelor of Arts majoring in psychology, you can do a Bachelor of Science majoring in psychology. So I did a Bachelor of Arts majoring in psychology because I wanted to do English teaching, and my Bachelor of Education. So with the arts degree, I had to choose subjects that were relevant to the teaching. So there was English, there was languages, and there was history. But had I chosen, say, a Bachelor of Science, I would have done subjects like maths or chemistry or physics. So those areas might have some prerequisites. So different universities would have, I guess, some information on if you chose to do a Bachelor of Science, it's preferred that you've actually studied chemistry or you studied physics. So it just depends on which degree you go through. So when I was actually in the lectures doing the psychology subjects, there were people around me who were in different degrees. So there were some who were just doing science degrees, there were some who weren't doing education. But the psychology subjects, they were all the same. So once you get through the first 3 years, so you have a major in psychology, You're not a psychologist yet, as I said, not yet. Firstly, you have to do a 4th year. So that can be an honours year or a graduate diploma of psychology. So you have to get, depending on the university that you go to, certain marks to get into that. So it could be a credit average or a distinction average. So that's a 4th year. It's called the research year, where you choose a research topic and you write a big paper, so a huge thesis. I think it was, 15,000 word thesis. And that was when I looked at adolescent decision making and coping styles, because that was something that really interested me at that time. So you have to do that 4th year. So you do that 4th year and you get through and you write this big book, or I call it a big novel. You're still not a psychologist. You're a conditionally registered psychologist. So I can't use the term, yes, my name's Kelly and I'm a psychologist. No, I'm a conditionally registered psychologist. So then there's more study or more training after that. So there's quite a bit of information there that I've put on the link from the psychology board. But if you just look at the screen, this is just a bit of a step-by-step process. So I've explained up the top there, you've got your undergraduate degree in psychology. So some people might do that and they don't want to be a psychologist. They just want a psychology major. Then they might go off and do other work in terms of marketing or in terms of being in business, or they just might want to have psychology on their resume because it's a pretty cool degree to have, because you're dealing with human beings and the study of the mind. So then if you choose to continue, we've got that 4th year, that honours year or that diploma. And then you're provisionally registered, or as I said, you're a conditionally registered psychologist. So there are a number of different options, as you can see here, in terms of taking it to that next step. So the step I did was this one here, 4 plus 2 year internship. So I did the honours in the undergrad, and then I worked for the Department of Education as a school counsellor, and I had training under a supervisor there, and I had to meet continual had to do reports and had to meet different requirements for 2 years, had to do some additional training, learning on the job. And after that 2 years, I submit all of that information to the psychology board, fingers crossed I'm approved, and then I became a psychologist. So that was the way I did it. But there's a number of other options there. But to be quite honest, that level, that's all overwhelming right now, and you don't really need to know that. It's a minimum of 6-year process. That's the biggest thing. You might not know if you want to be a psychologist, because the areas of psychology are so broad. You might not know if you want to specialise in an area. You might not know what area really works for you. And you don't need to know that when you finish school or when you start psychology. Because what I actually found was, it took me, I guess, a while to really realise where I fit and where I worked best. And the best way that I came to understand that is when I was actually doing my internship. I realised that I really loved working with kids and I loved working with teenagers, but I also worked at a medical centre, and I really liked working with adults too. So it was for me, I was constantly learning, discovering more about myself, but also discovering how best I wanted to work. And so for me, when I said that I did an additional postgrad, so that was after I became a psychologist, that was a choice of mine, because I wanted to look at other ways of working as a therapist, other ways of using additional strategies that I wasn't really taught when I was at uni. Uni was great. It was a good foundation, but there was no really strong practical skills that I learned. The best stuff that I learned was actually working. That's when I really, really got a good grasp of how I wanted to be a psychologist and how I wanted to work as a psychologist. So that's the process there. So that's a lot of administration stuff. That's kind of some general stuff about psychology. I guess it's also an awareness of my path and my career and how I've, I guess, come to opening up a private practice, which was a huge decision for me a couple years ago. So a really strong message that I have for young people is never let age get in the way of making decisions as well. I had so many people say to me, oh, private practice, that's a huge responsibility. You're so young, you should have more experience. 6 years isn't enough. No, that wasn't the case for me. I knew how I wanted to work. I knew the limitations of the different environments that I had worked in. And I had a good grasp of where I wanted to see my business go and how I wanted to connect with people. So it's pretty awesome to say, I get up at the beginning of the day and I control where the day goes. I book in my clients. I do that intake assessment. I control how I work. So typical day, lots of planning and preparation. So on average, I'd see about 5 clients a day. Some psychologists see 13 clients a day. For me, research talks about a good balance, and I really want to be able to commit totally to my patients. So five is a good number for me, 4 to 5. So I have them slotted in into certain time slots. There's no walk-in, so it's not like I get a knock at the door and I get some random person who wants some help. It's all by appointment only. It depends on the day. Some days I'm doing individual one-on-one therapy. Some days I'm working with a child. I have a play therapy room. Some days I'm actually in meetings, so I might be in a case meeting with a school, or I might be with community services, or I might be with work cover. So it might not actually be one-on-one therapy. It's about me being an advocate for my clients, so being able to support them in whatever way I can. So depending on that, rereading my notes, planning, doing all of that kind of stuff. Big part of my job is administration. So unfortunately, it's not just doing awesome work with a client and then see you later and then move on to the next client. Unfortunately not. There's emails, there's phone calls, there's case notes, there's report writing, which isn't my most favourite part of my job, but it's got to be done. A typical day at work is also focusing on my self-care. I consciously do that daily, from when I get up in the morning, from my diet to any physical activity, to rest time, to break time. So I specifically factor that into my day. A typical day at work is always as well knowing that it might not go exactly how I planned it, because sometimes I can think a session's going to go a certain way, but then a client comes in and their needs perhaps have changed or something's happened in their life, which means I have to respond in a different way. So it's pretty exciting in that no one day is ever the same. And even if I think I know exactly how my day is going to go, I can get to the end of the day and kind of be like, wow, I never saw that one coming. So knowing that I have to let go a little bit and accept that it might not always go the way I think, and that's okay as well. So responding to the unexpected is a big part. So then ultimately, I guess I've gone through a lot about my work. I have to say that my job is pretty amazing. It's a very unique role in which you have this really important therapeutic alliance or therapeutic relationship with somebody, where I tell my clients we're a team. It's not me sitting up here and telling them what to do or telling them what they have to change. It's about working with them, working as a team, and hopefully empowering them and being able to go on this journey with them, which can be really hard for some and really, really difficult in terms of their needs, their background. They can be really vulnerable. I can be presented with a range of different emotions, from grief and sadness to depression, anxiety, behavioural difficulties, loss, trauma, and that's heavy stuff. But at the same time, it's a privilege to be able to do what I do and to see when clients actually blossom in front of my eyes. For some, that might take a few sessions. For some, that might take years. So for me, it's important to know the difference in that. So being able to see that growth and change is very, very important to me. And also the fact that I learn something new every day. My clients teach me things. I discover about their hardships, about their resilience, but I also discover more about myself in my reactions to them. So to be exposed to, I guess, humanity on a daily basis, and people putting so much trust in me and me being able to be there for them is a really amazing job. It took a while to get to that point, but at the same time, for me, it's a blessing to be a psychologist. And if you see a psychologist at the moment and you really like them, I think that's fantastic. So for me, I always say to my clients, the therapeutic relationship is important. If for whatever reason I'm not the right psychologist for you, that's okay, I'm not offended. I'll find you who works for you. You have to be comfortable with your psychologist, and you have to be able to trust them and know where they're at. So that's a big part of it. So that's me. That's the life of this psychologist. Other psychologists might see it a bit differently, but that's where I come from. That's what life is like in my private practice. That's been my journey. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope it's given you a bit more information about my world, my job, and I guess now it's question time. So let's go for some questions. I'll do my best to answer them. If I can't answer them, I'll let you know. And on my PowerPoint, there's my website. So if you need to contact me or you have any other questions, you can click on my website. There's some contact details, there's email and there's phone, so we can go about it that way too. Okay, question time. Okay, that's a really, really good question. So what happens if I didn't get the marks? So remember that psychology is, because it's so broad and you major in psychology, different unis actually have different marks for the degree. So a Bachelor of Arts at one uni might be this mark, it might be a different mark at another uni. If you can get into uni, you might start with psychology and continue on. But if you don't actually get that mark, there are a number of other different options through TAFE as well. So you can do different courses to then get into uni. So I guess my message with that is, it's okay if you don't get the mark, because there are always alternatives. It might take a little bit longer, but you can still get the same result. I had a friend who didn't get into psychology to start with. She firstly went to TAFE after 1 year, then she got into her Bachelor of Science, and now she's a psychologist. So she didn't get the marks, but she went about it a few different ways. On the website from the Psychology Board of Australia, they have a bit more information on that. So I guess ultimate message is, it's okay if you don't get in, because there are other ways. It just might take a little bit more time. Really, really good question. Look, I was okay at maths, but it wasn't my favourite subject either. The message for me is, there's always help. So the first year stats was actually okay. I don't think it was too full on. Second year got a bit harder. Third year and fourth year were for me more difficult. When I got into that, I just had some extra help from a tutor, and that was fantastic. So I guess it's only an aspect of the role. So for me, it was like, okay, I'm not going to be doing this or using this every single day. So it's just going to be a bit more time, a little bit more difficult, but there was always help. So I actually got somebody at uni. Firstly, with the friends that I met at uni, we'd sit together and we'd try and figure all this stuff out. Then there are tutorials where you can ask more questions. It's a bit different to lectures. But when it got a bit difficult in terms of the research stuff, I just got a tutor to help out, and that got me through, and that was fine. So I wasn't a maths whiz. I loved English more than anything, but it was enough to get me through. But good question. Ooh, how much did the course cost? I actually can't remember how much it cost, but the great thing about being in a country like Australia is you don't actually have to pay all these upfront fees if you can't afford it. There's a system called HEX, which means that you can actually pay for your degree as you start working, and it comes out of your pay. So that happens after you finish uni. So I think we're pretty lucky to be in Australia, whereby you don't just have to have, I don't know, $30,000 to be able to put on a degree. It actually can be something that happens when you work. You do have to, I guess, buy books and things like that, but there are always options with books. There's second-hand bookshops. There's, splitting the cost with your friends. So I would say don't let cost be a factor in choosing your degree, because we're in Australia and we can make it work. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the best part about that is you don't have to know. You can start off, as long as you have psychology as a major, really. Bachelor of Social Work is actually a different degree. It's actually a different degree to psychology. There is counselling involved, but it's not necessarily completely psychology. A Bachelor of Arts majoring in psychology can open up a lot of doors in order to be a counsellor. So you still have to have that 3 years undergraduate psych, but you might feel like that's enough for you and you don't want to continue to be a psychologist. Or after that first year, you can actually change degrees as well, which is pretty fantastic. So you're not locked in necessarily. You can actually transfer those credit points on and move on to another degree. So keeping it open, I think, at the beginning is helpful, but if you choose the wrong thing, you can actually move on to another degree, and there's lots of supports at uni to help you know how to do that as well. So it's not, oh, I've made the wrong decision and that's it. You can always make some changes and move on. Thank you.